Thank you for joining this installment of the Action Online Summit series. Today, I have with me Amit Pande, who's going to be talking about AI and the future of sales and marketing and how we can truly unlock growth. So, I think we've all been having this conversation about how technology is going to change in sales and marketing. And here we have an expert, a futurist maybe, on the topic. So, Amit, if you could please introduce yourself with a short bio, and let's get into the topic.
Thanks, Ruben, for having me on the show. Hey, everyone. My name is Amit. I am the head of strategy and growth at an artificial intelligence startup named Viso. I've been focusing on this space of what AI can do for different business functions for the last 5 years. I live here in California, and I consider myself a lifelong volunteer for social and nonprofit causes as well.
Very good. So now, one of the things that I think that we should be thinking about is how sales and marketing and the technology that drives it can start to use some similar technology that other platforms, other technologies, other use cases are using. When I think of self-driving cars, or I think of Waze with navigation, or I think of all the various things that we're seeing in our lives, both for business or for personal. What are some of the parallels? What are some of the launch pads that are taking place where we might to see some of that crossover?
Ruben, that's such a great analogy. 10, 15 years ago, if you were driving around the United States or anywhere in the world, you had paper maps. And then we kind of went through this era of the early Google Maps, Waze phase, if you will. And, this Thanksgiving or Christmas or Diwali, wherever people are in the world, we're going to be using either an advanced version of Google Maps or, in some cases, a self-driving car. The analogy here to what is happening in the world of sales and marketing is that 10 years ago we really first started getting digital in the first place, really started collecting some data about the sales and marketing process. And that's really the world of almost like the world of paper maps. We were just collecting data. We were stuffing all this data into marketing automation systems or customer relationship management or CRM systems. And we practically did that for the first 2 decades of these technologies. But what's really happened in the last 5 to 7 years is that now we're entering this era that, just like Google Maps, we're able to now take all that data, apply AI to it, and actually give practical guidance. So, in the same way that Waze gives you guidance on where to go, the new AI technologies we have can tell you which customers to target, how to serve them better, and ultimately how to turn your sales reps into more effective, more empathic selling machines, if you will. Now, the analogy of the self-driving car, all that I'll mention there is that in the future, I do see a world where there are parts of the sales and marketing process that we'll trust the technology to run on its own, and there's parts of the technology where we'll continue to rely on our human ingenuity in the same way that you can take control of your self-driving car anytime.
Now, for some people, this might be a little intimidating because the first thing that a lot of people think of when they think of AI is my job going to be replaced? If I am in the delivery business, if I'm in the driving business, if I'm in the putting physical objects, or even doing certain things that are administrative, doing things within Salesforce, doing automation tasks, setting up CRM systems. When we see the future in 5, 10 years from now, how are the jobs going to change? How can we set ourselves up for success so that we can be, future thinking and future proof ourselves?
It's such a great question when it comes to how many more kinds of jobs and entire new industries will be created in the next 10 to 20 years. Um, in many ways, the way I look at it is that it's not our jobs that are going to be replaced, but it's the low value added parts of our jobs, the
Hmm.
repetitive, somewhat mind numbing, almost administrative parts of our jobs that will get automated. You take the simple example of how, when as a salesperson, you go have a conversation with a prospect, and for decades, you were expected to take your Friday afternoons off, very much like this Friday afternoon, and take 4 to 6 hours every week and update every single interaction, every single prospect data point into your CRM system. Kind of keep clacking away at a keyboard, and that's just something that has happened for too long. In fact, Salesforce itself published a report a few years ago that 2 out of every 3 minutes of a salesperson were being spent either on admin tasks or in front of a computer versus in front of a customer. Only 1 out of 3 minutes was actually in front of a customer, which, if you think about it, is quite a shame. So I think what's going to happen in the next 10 years is that hopefully we can shift some of that ratio. So the data entry that sales reps had to do can start getting a little bit automated. Now there will still be checkpoints and spot checks, if you will, and sampling of the data. But where you can see the world evolving to is that for every sales rep that's out there today, every marketer that's out there today, we will be able to use these technologies and say, based on what you're seeing me do, tell me what kinds of conversations I should be having with this customer, or tell me what to anticipate. What else are these people doing? Because um, the buyer today, people like you and me, we are all way more informed about this than we've ever been. And every product that is being sold out there is now being sold out there in a market very much like I use the analogy of the Bachelor or the Bachelorette, right? The show. You're always on stage and you're always competing with different providers out there. So part of your job becomes knowing where to be consultative and creative and sort of empathic, and where to leave the buyer to have time on their own. And I love this visual that you're showing here,
Well,
because
what's interesting about this visual is that it's a Venn diagram, but it's not a Venn diagram. And for some reason, it makes me feel a little uncomfortable that there's no crossover. It's either humans or AI. This is the future where AI takes over.
it's a very
it's
interesting point. Now
it's
the Venn
almost like
diagram is the top, really, in a sense, right? And that's it's a slightly shifted up Venn diagram. But you're
well
absolutely
said.
right that if you look at the example of where it says AI forecasting, it's a great example of where your AI automation can recommend to you, hey, here's where we think your forecast is going to land based on what we've seen you do for the last couple of quarters. And the human ingenuity comes in saying, I know this quarter is a little bit different. The world's a little bit different. Something's happened in the world. So I'm going to override this part of the forecast, but trust this other part of the forecast. So that's an example of a place where you take the best of automation and ingenuity and do augmentation with AI. Another example of this is where you see deal recommended actions. So this is something we'll see a lot of in the next couple of years, right? That once you have AI sitting on top of older platforms, you're definitely going to have more insight. So in a sense, I will make the provocative statement that insights are going to be what information and data used to be. There's going to be
Mm.
so many insights that we won't know what to do with those insights. So the real differentiation now for good technology is going to be, can you close the loop? Can you give me enough choices and menus of choices that I can navigate through them and say, okay, of all these actions that the AI is recommending, based on my human judgment, I should take this action in this particular moment. A little bit like the example of the Waze app that you mentioned earlier, where you can still take that left turn because you have some experience that there's this particular spot in the city that tends to get jammed up a little bit. But you're absolutely right, Ruben. Automation will take away some tasks. And I think it's a good thing because nobody
Yeah.
really wants to spend their life filling out forms.
It's a great point. I totally agree. We had a meeting just actually this week, and what we did was we had two CSV files.
Mm.
We had one CSV file, which was all the people that have signed up for a free trial to Dubb. We had, and then within that, there was a qualifier, a parameter, if they are paid users or if they're unpaid users, if they're either free trialers or just free users. And then we had a second CSV file, which was simply as an export from Zoom of all the people that have registered for any of our live trainings or our demos or our sales calls, anything. It's about 2,000 or 3,000 people. And what was interesting is we were all on the call and we say, well, how do we cross-reference one CSV to the other CSV so that we can know how many of the people that we've met with have subscribed, i.e., what is our conversion rate on demos to close rates? And it was interesting because this is a very, very simple task. I mean, this has existed within Excel since Excel was probably invented. Using either a VLOOKUP or some sort of an intelligent tool or some script. And what was interesting is that I thought to myself, I was like, this is one of those moments where you need to have, an Alexa, a Siri, a Google that says, here's one thing, here's another thing. Please tell me how many of X was in Y and give me the simple ratio, the simple conversion rate. And
Mm-hmm.
that is not with us yet. We have to do it the
Excuse me.
very old school method of using Excel or Google Sheets, manually sort of calculating this stuff and then figuring out what some of that stuff is. This is a classic example of one of those very kind of boring remedial tasks that someone on the team has to do, but it's important. But eventually, it does need to get replaced. So, how do you see this sort of Alexa of the CRM formulating? What does the future hold for that?
It's such an interesting question you asked, Ruben, because the last startup that I was at that worked in this space, which is a startup that got me into artificial intelligence in the first place back in 2016, is a company called Tack.ai. We were actually building exactly what you just said. We were building an Alexa or a Siri of sorts for salespeople, a personal assistant that every salesperson can have that can take care of some of their administrative activities. We learned a couple of lessons along the way. One of the interesting lessons there is that in an enterprise and work environment, your Alexa experience has to be very different than at home, where you or I could ask the same question as our children or our partners, and Alexa is going to give the same response. And it's fine when the stakes are about making a great toasted sandwich, right? But when you're now accessing customer data, you realize that the actual, literally the physical experience of the Alexa, we are still in the early years of voice truly being adapted. So it's still being used, right? And I think there are experiences like Alexa that are allowing us to do simple things like being able to do almost like a VLOOKUP, right? Give me this information from Salesforce, push this information to Salesforce, maybe schedule a meeting. But I think the true Alexa, which, if you will, for the enterprise, for the sales function, I think it's not just going to be in voice. I think it's
Yeah.
going to be a combination of certainly voice and other modalities of experience. But I'm personally now finally starting to get excited um, about the three-dimensional virtual world that we're going to enter, regardless of all the news this week with the renaming of a very popular social media network. I will tell you that I think that the Alexa like experience of the future, especially for business functions, is going to be more three-dimensional, kind of more metaverse like, if you will, and where we'll be able to have these digital avatars alongside us, where you can say, hey, can you take a look at these two CSV files and just kind of tell me the difference? Because at that point, in maybe in 10 years, we may even have AI co-workers. Now,
Mm.
how will we compensate them, and will they have their own rights? There's great science fiction minds which have speculated this, but I think that we're going to see this happen in the next 10 years more than in the last 5 years. And Alexa was actually the stepping stone to making this happen in a very different way.
Well, one of my biggest nightmares is to one day wake up and have one of my robots, one of my AI powered pieces of technology say, "Ruben, you need to start paying me." That's going to be one of those moments where I said, "Uh-oh, I better unplug this." Now, just to get a little meta on you, there is this idea of beyond voice, beyond text. And what's so interesting is that so much of the effort that's done in sales and marketing is actually text based. People are sending emails, people are sending LinkedIn messages, people are sending SMS messages. Now, it's been proven there is so much data on this that the text medium in general is a very ineffectual medium. In fact, 90% of human communication is done visually. This is a visual communication because we can see each
Mhm.
other and we can share what's on our screen. Text is not that. It's simply a combination of letters and words to create ideas. And the other thing is that when humans compute visuals, they compute it at 60 times, 60,000 times faster than that of text. Now, my question for you is, how can we empower sales, marketing professionals, people in business communication to leverage other mediums besides text? And what does that look like? Is it video? Is it AR? Is it VR? Is it XR? What does the future hold for this type of next generation comm?
I love this question because, in many ways, it's how our conversation started through a conversation on LinkedIn, which wasn't a textual conversation. I felt like I saw the real you because you represented yourself in a video story that you shared with me. And I immediately connected the dots to what Dubb itself is doing. So I definitely think that with short format video and with the idea of doing more video based storytelling, whether it's about your customers or about your products, and turning those things into the heroes of your company. We are seeing the most frontier companies certainly do this already. And I think this will happen more and more. So at a very tactical level in the next few years, certainly this means account based marketing experiences, or event experiences are going to be more visual, more than just Zoom, right? They're going to be almost filled with people talking, but also with a lot of other almost like three-dimensional movement, right? So let's say you and I are talking, and in this conversation, we invoke a small little product somewhere here. That's already something that we're doing in this kind of interaction. But if you fast forward that, I think shared experiences is definitely going to be a big thing. I mean, take the classic example of enterprise buying today, which is a committee buying process, which has gone from 5 or 6 people being involved to 12 to 15 people or 20 people being involved in a buying committee. You have to wrangle everybody's calendars, get everybody into the same room. Rarely happens. You make a presentation for a set of people. By the time you get to the second set of people, half of the context has been lost. I mean, you can fundamentally transform the nature of selling by turning it into some kind of a three-dimensional, rich, video and interactive conversation where you strike the balance between, on the one hand, presenting what you wanted to present, your best foot forward, but on the other hand, your audience is 20 people with 20 different expectations. And if you're able to give them that freedom to hear you, but also navigate within this larger space, which could be the metaverse you mentioned, or it could be, a future where you could be represented as a hologram inside of that system. And now you can go and take a look at the product demo, even while the main meeting's going on. It may be a 2-hour meeting and not a 1-hour meeting, but you'd probably do the deal cycle faster. You'd have a happier customer, which thinks that they've brought something on their own terms. And it changes the way you think about the salesperson, right? Because you don't think, one of the terms that is often offended me personally is when people talk about sales reps as coin operated. And you realize that sales is one of the hardest functions in the world to do. It's an entrepreneurial job. And I think these technologies will help the future salesperson be a combination of a McKinsey consultant and an IDEO designer and a Pixar storyteller.
Nice. And without getting paid.
Well, and then your salesperson could become a company of one, right? So maybe,
Yeah.
since you said about being meta, I mean, you're a great example of this. I think in that future, in 10 to 20 years, I think the corporations, there will be mega corporations for
Yeah.
sure. But
Yeah.
I think people like you and me and the future generation, everybody has to start thinking about how they can be a business of one,
Right.
and think of their own marketing, think of their own sales. So actually, we should be paying attention to salespeople because their very profession demands that they do that every day. And I
Right.
actually think, just a final point on this, right? That if you're in Bogota or in Nairobi, the gap between you and a salesperson that may have started off with the advantage of being in a more privileged geography, that gap is closing faster because the combination
Mhm.
of these technologies, like the one you offer and other technologies that will come in the future, and your own personal learning skills, that just means that there's a lot more talent out there. And everybody today, regardless of their experience, we need to be a different person every 2 years.
We need to evolve like the lizard skin. We need to shed it and reinvent ourselves. I couldn't agree more on that. Um, there's this sort of idea of artificial intelligence technology helping us and then hurting us. And I think that a lot of what people suffer from is fear, in fact, where it's fear of technology, where if I start to utilize this technology, that it's actually going to hurt me. I'm going to have this steep learning curve. It's going to intimidate me. It's going to force me to be vulnerable, to make mistakes, to fail. But the fact of the matter is, to your point, is that if we're not reinventing ourselves every year, what are we doing? We're going extinct. We're becoming antiquated. And I think that now is the time more important than ever as leaders to be able to say, you know what, I'm okay being vulnerable. I will delegate certain things to people on my team and I'll have them teach me and then I'll reinvent myself. And once I'm comfortable, I'll start using that tech. So I really like how you articulate that. Yeah.
It's definitely an interesting time to be alive.
In fact, you're so right. Now, I wanted to share something that I'm kind of excited about that we've been working on at Dubb. I'd love to get your feedback at some point, but this is actually an AI tool that we invented called Kyra, and I'm really proud of the fact that we got the letters AI in an Italian sounding sort of a cool name. This is our Siri. This is our Alexa. We call it Kyra. This is that word Kyra means the name of Kyra rather means beloved ones. It's kind of nice. But what happens is that when you record a video similar to the video that I sent you to invite you to this event, what happens is that it does an analysis. It does a 9-point analysis on everything that the person says. It does the cadence, the repetition, fillers, a bunch of other parameters where it can start to actually figure out, are you using too much jargon? Did I use the word platform or value too much? It was my communication empathetic? Was I being you focused or value focused? Was I being persuasive? Was my speed too fast? I've seen people speak at 200 words per minute, which is unfathomable. It's very difficult to listen to. Repetition, fillers, so on and so forth. These are sort of some of our examples on how we can improve people's communication. Now, what people always ask us when it comes to stuff like this is, well, can you do the editing for me? If I upload a script, can you have a deep fake character go and become me? You mentioned holograms. People are going to want deep fake sales reps in the future. What can we expect in terms of taking our calm and using tools like Kyra, using tools like deepfake to actually one day be able to say, you know what, I need to take the day off, but I've got so and so Kyra to help me work it out today.
I love the example you just shared, and I'd love to see the product. One of the things that this will bring over time is more empathy, I believe.
Yeah.
For example, some of the data that we've seen within the space is that some of the best sales reps, they are talking less than 50% of the time. They're engaging the prospect to speak a lot more than the rep speaking. And you'll see there was an older generation of reps, kind of the pre-Moneyball phase of baseball, if you will, to use a metaphor, where it was all about, you need to tell the person what they want, right? And you're seeing kind of this idea that things like talk ratio, question rate, how somebody handles objections. I love what you mentioned about the word you versus the word we versus the word I. This is going to, over time, develop more empathy between people. Because you kind of realize that, we're all getting into these 30-minute, 45-minute, 60-minute Zoom meetings. And, we need to know in 10 minutes if things are clicking, right?
Yeah.
And often people don't know how to do this. And these technologies can often be like Switzerland and say, look, I'm going to tell something to both of you that's just going to help both of you without the person saying, can you just stop? Because everybody, we find that rude to do. If you fast forward this, I think this will lead us to giving more guidance to individuals, whether they're sales reps or marketers or CEOs about to make their first investment pitch to an investor, to know beforehand what to watch out for. For example, if you think about when people get under pressure because they're asked really difficult questions, what happens? Your speaking rate goes up. And so if you know that, then you're probably going to be more ready for it. The example you mentioned about taking a day off, the future equivalent of going to the golf course, which a lot of people, sometimes feel salespeople do.
I think that was a Freudian slip. I think that's what I need.
I was gonna say I've actually met very few reps who like to do golf. I wonder where that meme came from, but I do think that will happen at some point in the future, and it really opens up the question of employment, right? Do you pay for outcomes, or do you pay for hourly wage, or do you pay for essentially a retainer every month, which is what the salary model is? And I think that all those of us who are in startups today or solopreneurs today, we're actually at the frontier of this,
Hmm.
because this is the way future corporations will be. So I do see this perhaps evolve, as a final note, in the direction of companions, perhaps, where you have an AI companion who might be your sales underling, if you will. And you say, I'm going to take the day off, but I've already done 3 meetings with you all. And my AI companion is prepared to have a conversation with you. And here's the interesting thing. I think if we get the empathy and the emotion of the character right, then people on the other side are willing to accept if there are errors in the process. If you go back to the 1970s or 80s experiment at MIT, the ELIZA experiment, which was one of the first bots that people could talk to, you'll realize that ELIZA in 1970s was actually pretty basic. But you should see the questions people asked, and Eliza would just simply reflect that back. And a lot of people thought it was like going to a therapist in the 70s. So I think the human centered design of these avatars or these technologies in the future is going to be as important as whether they always have the perfect
Hmm.
answer. And we have to, like have that human like quality to them. So exciting times for anyone who's designing AI products for sure.
Well, you're so right about that, and I just wanted to express my gratitude for the time on this session today. I have up on the screen your LinkedIn profile, so I'd love to have people know where they can connect with you, they can follow you, your social channels, and of course, I'd love to learn more about your LinkedIn header. If I'm not mistaken, is this Calvin and Hobbes or
Yes.
okay?
Yes, it's. I used to have this on Twitter, and I always felt that it was one of the most meta, to use the word of the week, ways of thinking about two friends having an endless conversation, which is what the Action Summit feels like to me. Except it's different friends coming in at different times into the party and leaving, and it just keeps going on. I'm glad you like it. Thank you for making the comment about it. I should reward myself this weekend by going and actually reading some Calvin Hobbes
Or playing golf.
or play golf.
If anyone does that anymore. Well, Amit, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you. Stick around for some production notes.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Ruben.